What a day it is, and thank you all for joining me for episode 2 of the Jonathan Morris Schwartz My Manic Brain, Sex, Politics, and Everlasting Life program on my YouTube channel, Jonathan Morris Schwartz, and also podcast audio version on Spotify, Patreon, and iTunes. Want to remind you that this program emanates from my book, My Manic Brain, Jonathan Moore Schwartz, Sex, Politics, and Everlasting Life. This is a 63-chapter book. It's available on Amazon.com, and a lot of what we explore in this program is directly from the book. Please comment, and a lot of it is designed to be provocative, thought-provoking, social commentary. I use a lot of pronouns. I also want to point out that these stories and illustrations that we go through on the program are oftentimes interchangeable. Sometimes it's the man who's done wrong, sometimes it's the woman, but it's more this particular day focusing on jealousy, betrayal, the fear of losing control with love and relationships, the anxiety over knowing or not knowing or thinking you can trust someone and ending up being betrayed, and how we process that and how it affects our lives from a very, very young age. So without further ado, let's dive into my manic brain. This time, he means it. So what about children? What about family? What about the future? Many can substitute food or drugs or sex and plod along in a warm, fuzzy family environment of occasional trips to Disney, gorge on pancake adventures at IHOP, get cozy by snuggling and suspending disbelief. But in the end, our attention span has been decimated to the point where satisfaction is no longer achievable. We end up being months or a very few years from entering our own worlds of virtual sex, emotional intellectual stimulation, and digital orgasms, whereas there will be no need for the foolish dance of foreplay. Immortality is near, but it will necessitate the next scientific miracle: effective, safe, individually targeted psychedelic drugs. Simply said, the days of delayed sacrifice or slaving for 30 or 40 years in a nonsensical, demeaning job, then spending whatever pittance you have saved on medical bills and a nursing home will be over at some point, because the belief that life consists of ups and downs and that you can only appreciate the highs if they are preceded by lows will be as quaint as waiting until marriage to have sex. There will be only highs. There will be a pill or a smoke or an injection that keeps you satisfied, always. Bipolar will become unipolar, an everlasting high. There will be no need for disappointment. Heartache will be so 20th century. We will understand and accept that carnal pleasure can be simulated. Love, as we have defined it, is or will be dead and gone. LGBTQ will be encased in a glass display at the Smithsonian, because we will understand that sex is always sex, stimulation is stimulation, and it will be all blurred in terms of gender and sexuality and genitals. An orgasm is an orgasm, a kiss is a kiss, a fantasy is a fantasy. There will be no need for discrimination against others, against people who experience love, emotion, sex, desire differently. The digital world will provide the means to that end. Already is. But wait, you say, what about true love, deep beneath the beautiful, my ride or die love? Yes, there will be that occasional love, like the 3-minute opening scene of the movie Up, where the school-age sweethearts spend a lifetime of moral, discipline, timeless, take your breath away till death do us part love. Indeed, like unicorns and mermaids, it can happen. But increasingly, those living lives of quiet desperation will decide to throw caution to the wind and take the red pill. If he ever cheats on me, it's over. What if she never finds out? Oh, she will, and she will leave him immediately, right? Well, honey, he says, I'll be about an hour late from work today. Okay, dear, how come? Well, we're all meeting about the new account. It's my job, sweetie, he justifies. Okay, baby, as she flips through the mail. She knew the minute she laid eyes on the unstamped handwritten letter, the front of which simply had her name with no return address. It had been 20 years since she remembered feeling her heartbeat and her temples pulsating. She trusted her husband, but that physical and auditory sensation of blood rushing through her ears as she slowly opened the envelope and pulled out the tri-folded paper with a grainy but unmistakable black and white picture of her man sensually kissing another woman hit her like a ton of bricks. They were fully dressed. Her initial self-protection impulse was a flimsy attempt at self-delusion. Maybe he was in a play at the community theater. Maybe it's his long-lost cousin. Maybe. Oh, God, at the bottom of the page it simply said, thought you should know. When he came home, she simply said, I know. He said, know what? How could you? What are you talking about? I whipped out the picture. He looked down. It is nothing, he mustered. Well, let me spare you the ensuing fighting, begging, questioning, bargaining, and such. Suffice to say, despite swearing to her friends, family, and any stranger who would listen that she would never forget cheating, that is exactly what she did. Why? Because she's a weak fool? No. Because she is a glutton for punishment? Unfair. Because she believed him when he swore he would fight like hell to keep her, that he would do therapy, anything to keep her? Yep. But he continued to cheat. Yep. She never had the courage to leave. Everyone knew she was allowing it. Many lost respect for her. Some understood. Some said, get your revenge. Eventually, he left. She was alone, broke, humiliated. 6 months later, she took him back. He cheated again. She forgave. He left again. She took him back again. Eventually, he left for good. Why couldn't she be strong? Why did she allow herself to be disrespected while the world watched? Why? That last illustration, which had a woman being done wrong by the man, basically can be reversed. There's just as many men who are done wrong by women and who are indeed having to struggle with the same pain of betrayal, trust, romance, sex, their own physical, biological selves, their spiritual, religious ideals, norms. And so as we move on into the next part of my manic brain, today's episode, the thread is to a large degree how people process betrayal, being cheated on physically or emotionally. This next chapter touches on sex, money, and robots. And away we go. They wore the lovemaking out. There was no unpredictability anymore. Kissing, touching, missionary, roll over, roll back over, wait for her to finish, close eyes, think of the fantasy of the day, finish, slide off, out of breath, smile a little bigger than reality warrants, fight. We got to spice things up. It's boring now. Okay, it's the same shit every time, I know. We've been together so many years, so don't you want something different? Something unpredictable? Something new? What are you saying? Well, are you saying that you're fucking bored? Everybody wants fresh dick and pussy. That's normal to want something new. True. It wouldn't take truth serum for most to admit they could sleep with someone different every night if that was the world in which we lived. But love is deeper than mysterious, fresh, unpredictable sex, right? Love is what happens in between sex, right? Love is dependability. Love is reliability. Love is listening. Love is caring for the children. Love is selflessness. Love is self-control. Love means accepting that every honeymoon ends, thus beginning the more meaningful stage, right? Modern couples sometimes take a socially pragmatic approach and simply admit after a few drinks they know each other's sexual desires and fall into a predictable, boring pattern, lacking spontaneity, and sometimes open their relationships to threesomes or allowable cheating, quote unquote, or varying types of sexual group play. They believe that these progressive behaviors on some level will spice things up while simultaneously, quote unquote, saving them from a certain breakup. Typically, this ends in disaster. Yes, perhaps the forbidden carnal experimentation initially may be exciting and enjoyable, but it usually provides no more than a temporary, futile attempt, since once you open things up to the masses, unexpected emotional and intellectual compatibility often creep in with someone other than your quote unquote soulmate. What is love? Well, Do You Love Me from Fiddler on the Roof essentially concluded that if a woman cooks, cleans, and does the laundry, she loves him. And presumably, if he milks the cows and works his fingers to the bone, he loves her too. I don't remember any Broadway musicals proclaiming love as perfecting the ideal oral sex or stimulating the vagina at least as well as the dildo purchased at the last girl's only party. Willful deception can work, but as norms change, divorce and multiple partners become acceptable and even encouraged, sex robots become more realistic, and money ends up the only true aphrodisiac, sex will, or might, let me know in the comments what you think, become entirely amputated from love. We will love those we cannot live without and often have sex with those we cannot live with. Now, as we move along to the next part of the program, I do at this point want to put up a slight word of disclaimer in that we are entering now a stage where we're going to explore 3 or 4 explicit, with some language, situations where man and woman have done each other wrong, have explored their sexuality at unexpected times, betrayed trust, many times in a manner where they felt they could either get away with it or that on some level they deserved it, and on another level felt they could get away with it and continue as if nothing happened, a willful deception. Here is the fork in the road. There is no such thing as an equal 50-50 give and take in any relationship. One always sublimates their own needs to the other. Sometimes the sacrifice falls within an overall compatibility, and it works for both the controller and the controlled. But oftentimes, at some point, the roles no longer work for one or the other, and it ends. Sometimes ends means a breakup or a divorce. Sometimes end means years or decades of quiet desperation and hanging in there. Sometimes there's violence or sickness or psychosis, and sometimes there's a mutual understanding that people change and want different things and drift apart and get bored and anxious, and the initial romantic dream gets punctured, deflates, withers, and dies. Many choose to maintain a grand illusion or delusion of togetherness while secretly sneaking off and enjoying another life, another world. Sometimes an entirely other family. Others cannot function in that smog of duplicity and need a clean break to start fresh. Sometimes relationships and marriages, despite all odds, do survive. Sometimes the vows stick. Occasionally, days turn into years, then decades, and ultimately a lifetime, and some have more than one ride on the bucking bronco. Regardless, there is always a fork in the road, and as Yogi Bear said it best, when you come across it, it is best to take it. Ladies and gentlemen, let's begin with Everyone Craves Fresh Dick and Pussy illustration number 1. When they met at a coworker's house party, there was an immediate spark. This was not the typical attraction where either the girl or the boy is feeling it and the other one less so, if at all. This was instant, mutual electricity. They drank and talked until the sun rose. Every moment was perfect, comfortable, confident. From the moment their fingertips touched, to the lingering stare, to the soft, warm wisp of shared breath, to the eternal space between their lips as they gently touched and ignited, they made the kind of love culminating in a melting into the sheets. The first time either of them literally lost any sensation of being a physical creature. The love was that deep. They felt it. The first few weekends together, they never left the bed. As days merged into weeks, they were both floating eternally in an incomprehensible cloud of spiritual and physical rapture. And then it happened. He began to attract the attention of female coworkers, friends and acquaintances who never gave him the time of day. The untouchables suddenly expressed interest, some with flirtatious glances, others with a slow, sensuous hug. One particularly persistent colleague, for whom he was enormously attracted, invited him back to her apartment to meet her new puppy. And in his delirious state of newfound serotonin-soaked love for his new girlfriend, he felt a dizzying, breathless confusion. What if it is just to show off her puppy? He went to her home. To the extent that any conscious thought occurred, his brain rationalized the affair, there was no puppy, as a strange, inexplicable, yet justifiable compliment or enhancement wholly to the advantage of his new love, for them. He rationalized he was doing it for her. Sure, a part of him believed he had potentially squandered and ruined everything. He had never lived this way before. His girlfriend injected confidence. The confidence created a swagger. The swagger intoxicated women who were awakened subconsciously, perhaps, and needed to conquer him. He sincerely felt she would understand the rendezvous was just sex. In fact, it truly was for her. They enabled him to appreciate even further his true love for her. He wanted only her, but could not deny the other woman whose desires had to be met. But it was only carnal, of course. Perhaps she would understand. His newfound sexual prowess expanded to 6 women before the only woman who ever made him feel alive and aroused and special and certain there was a God in heaven was able to read the last sentence of a text flashing up on his phone, ... suck you dry. He made a feeble attempt to explain, well, she comes over after jogging, goes straight to my refrigerator, grabs a water bottle, and is so frickin' thirsty she sucks it dry every time. She was not buying it. The allure of fresh pussy won, and he lost. Here comes Everyone Craves Fresh Dick and Pussy illustration number 2. They met in high school and were one of those mysterious couples who seemed to weather any storm and steadfastly stayed loyal and committed as the rest of their classmates either barely dated or knew that the kid in their health science or English class was not anything more than at best an adolescent adventure. 10th grade, 11th grade, and despite going to separate colleges, they were loyal to each other all 4 years. Their parents, their friends, the community, the pastor, the neighbors, strangers in the supermarket, everyone knew that they were the real deal. They could see it. High school sweethearts destined to make people envious, jealous, and a little dubious. They were conservative and intelligent and patient and meticulously saved money as they took a full year to plan their wedding. Of course, they both had temptations, particularly in college, but resisted straying and remained deeply committed to each other. Sure, their sex became predictable and as if they were already married, but they found ways to spice things up. And with their youthful looks, they weighed the same as they did in 10th grade, which also helped keep things magnetic. The wedding day had finally arrived. He was a handsome groom, and she was gorgeous in her flowing white dress. She had starved herself a bit the past few days and allowed for some champagne at 9 a.m. To relax and celebrate the occasion. By noon, she was barely able to pretend not to be outright drunk. The wedding was at a 1,000-room hotel, huge hotel with dozens of ballrooms and tourists and bartenders and waitstaff flittering around. Having 2 hours to kill, she peeked into one of the smaller meeting rooms and ducked inside. She had thought it was empty, but in the corner was a young man sitting alone. His head was in his hands. She turned to leave. He looked up. They stared for about 5 seconds. Neither of them said a word. He was incredibly young, at most 20, but perhaps still a teenager. She was 23. His room was 624. They took separate elevators. The door was cracked open. She slinked in. No words uttered. They slowly kissed. He said nothing. She undressed him. She undressed herself. They explored every centimeter. She licked him, sucked him, grabbed him. He rubbed and squeezed and so deeply penetrated she moaned and writhed. They finished, rolled over, stared blankly at the ceiling, said absolutely nothing. They dressed. By the time she made it to her ballroom, guests had arrived. The groom was in the side room with his family. The wedding went on. 9 months later, a baby. He was suspicious. DNA, proof, tears, divorce. A year later, both had found others and remarried. 8 years of loyalty, 1 last minute of fresh dick. The end. And here we go with Everyone Craves Fresh Dick and Pussy. Illustration Numero 3. Everything was perfect except the sex. It had become rote predictable, and they both sadly admitted that after years of marriage, child rearing, weight gain, and money ups and downs, they were no longer sexually attracted to each other. But everything else remained a dream. They were extremely compatible, enjoyed the same movies, food, travel destinations, books, and even had the same temperament and biorhythms. They enjoyed each other's company immensely. They loved each other, but were no longer physically satisfying each other and were as horny as 2 teenagers. They made what they thought was a rational decision. They would allow each other to seek sex elsewhere, but strictly recreationally. They would stay together and continue their marriage. Perhaps the dalliances would spice things up. They both swiped and dated, and after dozens of frogs, they both got lucky and scored. They even were comfortable enough to share the details of each session and refer to it as such to reinforce the purposeful separation of love and sex they were achieving so masterfully, they thought. It was going great until something unexpected occurred. For some reason, he began to develop a renewed sexual desire for his wife. She'd lost weight, he started thinking of her at work in the same way he did when they first met, and things were explosive and unpredictable and adolescent. He started to want her again. For her, though, while she still loved her husband and knew she would never connect so deeply with another man ever again, she did not want to have a sexual, or have the desire to have a sexual rebirth, nor did any physical desires naturally reemerge. She wanted her husband to be her best friend. He wanted his wife to be his best friend with benefits again and ultimately rediscover their true love. But it was too late. The fresh dick and pussy had destroyed their delicate balance. They divorced. She easily moved on. His heart was broken. This next chapter is a tough one because it's entitled Love Affair to End All Future Love Affairs, titled as such because, as you will find out, we all can relate to our first love. The first cut is the deepest. We oftentimes will believe that our first true, intense love experience is the real one, is the soulmate, is the one that oftentimes we compare all others to in the future. And this is an extreme case that happens sometimes when love is gained and something unpredictable and awful occurs and it changes you indefinitely. She was 17, he was 18. They met after school. They both ran track. He was tall and thin, pasty, white skin, long arms and legs. She was blonde, slightly tan, beautiful in an athletic way. It took 3 weeks of awkward conversations before she finally saw the spark in his eye, and they sat and talked on the high school football field until dark. He asked her to the movies. When he gently slid his hand into their intertwining fingers, gently rubbing her hands with his thumb, she could have sworn they had already made love. She was so excited and grateful for the blossoming sensations, she introduced him to her friends. He wrote her love notes. She sweetly cried. When they first kissed, she could not breathe. When they eventually made love, he cried. She knew she had found her prince. He knew he could not live without her. She was certain this love was it. Her Romeo, his Juliet, her knight in shining armor, his princess bride. For days, then weeks, then a few months, the joy of their togetherness, their passion, their compatibility, their touching and passion, and breathless, smooth, wet, sweet, stinging, panting eyes, and ecstatic, indescribably celestial happiness soared. Then, on a partly cloudy spring Saturday afternoon, she decided to surprise him. His parents were divorced, and he spent his weekends with in his father's charming log cabin. He had invited her to join him many times, but she spent most weekend on her grandparents' farm, riding horses and having family time. She was going to call him first, but she wanted to surprise him with a secret picnic basket with homemade bread and fruit and chocolate and a love letter. As she pulled up to the cabin, she saw his blue truck and assumed the small red car was his father's. She parked, grabbed the basket, and approached the front door. Each step she took, her heart pulsated. By the time she knocked on the door, something inside her knew. When she answered the door, she heard a giggle in the background. She heard the ocean in her skull. Her temples flared and felt like they would burst. She knew before she saw. He said her name out loud in a tone that was different. The other girl approached him from behind and slid her arms around his waist. He looked at her with an expression of remorse, sympathy, anger, and disappointment. She was in the kind of shock for which there would be no recovering. Her heart literally died, her innocence snuffed out, her trust, her plans, her future, her love was killed. The strange, some would argue perverse lesson she learned from being so brutally and unexpectedly betrayed was deviously simple. Sex is power, and as a young woman wielding that power, she did. Her only peace was the implementation of an unfair and misguided journey of revenge. But not against the young man who ruined her, against humanity and men itself and themselves. The first attack was in college. Of course, so many go to college with a boyfriend or girlfriend back home, and as they experiment with their newfound freedom of drinking, drugs, and recreational sex, most keep it on the down low, a universal known unknown, a rite of passage. But for her, it was a chance to get even. And so it began with a series of seducing men, but only after surreptitiously audio and videotaping their affairs and sending the footage to their girlfriends or wives. The cruelty was making sure her hunted male prey knew exactly what she did. She would show them the incriminating video, make them beg her to delete it. Then, just as she witnessed the fear and shame and disgust in their eyes, would ever so slowly hit send. Some of the men would cry, others would get verbally hysterical. One tried to hit her, but she managed to get away in the nick of time. You see, for every heart she broke, for every relationship and marriage she wounded or killed, it was for her the death of 1,000 cuts she needed to exact revenge over her very first love, who so irreparably bludgeoned her heart. For years she plotted and planned and meticulously targeted man after man, each time reveling in her power, each time looking them in the eye as they begged, "What about my wife? What about my girlfriend?" And each time swearing it would be their secret, each time persistently and seductively insisting, each time consummating, each time betraying, as she could never and would never understand or forgive or process what she did to deserve losing the only man for whom she would ever love. Her man, her soulmate. For months, then years, After her true love crushed her soul, she tried to make some sense of it. Why? What did she do wrong? Why did he stray? Was it all just pretend? She never recovered. Sure, she dated. She had sex with other men, partied, tried to love again, had very deep friendships. She eventually settled for a man who chased her and was so mercilessly loyal. It didn't matter that she did not love him. He did not care. He loved her, and that was enough. Her heart never healed. She never understood. She never forgave. He broke her heart permanently. Sometimes we experience a connection, a love that can never be duplicated, a love that leaves us vulnerable, a love we can never truly let go, a love cancer, a love so pernicious, so dangerous, so all-consuming that the best we can hope for is a long-term remission, whereas we live but are never, ever the same. And in today's last chapter and discussion of the Jonathan Morris Schwartz program, we're going to talk about a situation where we oftentimes don't want to believe our eyes. The expression, you're going to believe me or your lying eyes. And how sometimes the desire to have certainty, to trust fully, to be able to have that peace of mind can drive us, in some cases, almost insane. Here's a little illustration. He knew she was married. She knew he was married. They both knew there were young, innocent children involved, yet they continued to play with fire until their hands had simply first brushed together. They ended up clinging, and their bodies at some point began swiping and ended up rubbing together like powerful magnets. A quick kiss, a deep embrace. What are we doing? I don't know. The frantic search for a place to be alone, a hotel, a motel, an abandoned parking lot. Her place, his place. The mystery of the unknown, the adrenaline of the forbidden, the smell of the new, the unexpected moaning, grunting, screaming, the breathlessness, the fear, the anxiety, the guilt, rinse and repeat, repeat and rinse. The denial, the delusion as if they're not caught, it didn't happen. The unraveling, the consequence, the end of innocence, the betrayal, the filthiness, the joy, the loss, the aloneness, the regret. She could no longer sleep or eat or function in any meaningful way because she was certain he was either cheating or on the verge of doing so. She would monitor his phone, his email, his workplace, but nothing soothed the jealous, constant verge of a nervous breakdown existence she called a life. Finally, she did it. She secretly placed tracking devices in his car, his phone, and even his favorite jeans. She was now able to know for sure. He said he was going to Walmart, but the tracking device showed him going to a private home. He would say he was going to work, but his jeans said otherwise. When confronted, he lied. She decided to start trailing him. The tracker took her to a home address where she saw his car parked in the driveway. She approached the home. She walked around the side of the house, peeking through the cracks in the open blinds. She saw her husband standing in the bedroom with another woman. She was able to snap a mostly blocked picture of them on her phone. She ran to her car, sitting, panting, palpitating, sweating, crying. And herein lies the impossible, contradictory dilemma we all face when we deeply love and want to keep someone faithful. There is no human being on earth who would admit to having an affair willingly. Everyone who cheats lies about it. Even those caught in the act expect their spouses to believe them over their lying eyes, while those who have lost that loving feeling may not be neurotic about it. They too prefer not to be cheated on, regardless of whether it hurts their heart or pride, not to mention the risk of STDs. Horrifically, those with suspicions, warranted or not, often end up in a pervasive, 24 hours, 7 day a week, 365 day a year, paranoid anxiety that can never be quenched. Unless they literally inject a chip into their spouse like a dog, they will endlessly chase potentially cheating episodes with no ability to ever catch anything. It's difficult to imagine a greater psychological torture than being 99% certain your spouse is cheating, yet clinging to that 1% possibility they are not to barely get through the day and sleep at night. What makes this kind of relationship a mental illness is even if the spouse admits cheating, the aggrieved sometimes is so conflicted and stuck in a perverse mix of pride, competition, fear, anger, and jealousy, they end up twisting the blame upon themselves and begging for a second chance at being abused. Therefore, many people, when asked if they would want to know if their spouse ever cheated, say no. They're aware that there is no way back from such a betrayal. Sure, couples can forgive and recover and move on, but there is no removing the scar. There is no way to truly re-glue the pieces. The relationship may continue, but the vow, the promise, the discipline, the security is gone forever. So why bother? Why pretend? Why mistake love for lust? Why not just bounce from person to person until the eros wears off? Put plainly, why not just jump from buddy to sex buddy until the sex gets boring? Because we believe in fairy tales? Because the joy of new love is so powerfully erotic and intoxicating, our brain chemistry convinces us that this is it. This is our one, until the serotonin diminishes and our eyes start to wander and we again search for quote-unquote love. For many, the transition from talking, having an intellectual conversation, to kissing, undressing, and making love is profoundly difficult. At some point, one or the other decides to try to steal a kiss, and at that moment, they either experience the joy of submission or the agony of rejection. Rejection rips the Band-Aid off quickly. Mutual submission ends in someone's disillusionment and disappointment. For the moment you realize you have absolutely, utterly no control is the moment the honeymoon is over, and only time will tell if you and the love of your life will sink or swim. This concludes today's episode 2 of My Manic Brain by Jonathan Morris Schwartz, Sex, Politics, and Everlasting Life, available at Amazon.com. These episodes will continue on my YouTube channel. Please subscribe and like. Feel free to comment. I will respond to all of them. I greatly appreciate those of you who are listening and enjoying the topics. Please feel free. As I've mentioned, I am a First Amendment absolutist. Please comment, clarify, discuss. Let's let our manic brains work this out. Have a great day, and oh, what a day it is. Bye-bye, everybody.